with the creation stories that we have in the Bible. And then that last piece of audio was a reading of James Weldon Johnson's God's Trombone. And it was read by Val Gray Ward. And it comes from a wonderful collection of poetry called Hip Hop Speaks to Children. So it is both a printed book as well it can be found on various streaming services where you hear the authors, in some case those that are alive at the time of the recording, read poetry or hip hop, both literally what was, rap songs, but then also you have Langston Hughes and I'm blanking on the woman's name who Nikki Giovanni was the individual who sort of spearheaded this project. So, and given that we have been talking about the first 4 books of the book of Genesis, which deal with the creation, I thought that those would be fitting. Since as we move into the next portion of our study, which is we will deal with Noah and the flood and some of what is there. So I'd like to, before we get into the lesson, I'd like us to center ourselves, if we may, and I will be reading a portion of a liturgy and a book. I believe, Reverend Moyer, you were the one who turned me on to this, Every Holy Moment. This is me. Yeah. Yes. You hit me with something from this, and I immediately ran out and got it. This is a wonderful book of meditations, prayers, and reflection. I find it not only useful in moments like this when I may be called upon to bring us together in fellowship, but even in I'm wrestling with something in my own life and I don't know why, and I just need something. So Before Severing Others is one of the pieces, One Battling a Destructive Desire, For Those Fearing Failure, For Waiting in Line, For Those Experiencing Road Rage. When they talk about holy moments, they got it all, covered here. But I would like, since we are here to study and learn scripture in fellowship, I would like to read in part from a liturgy for students and scholars. And it begins, "May I learn to love learning, O Lord, for the world is yours, and all things in it speak, each in their way of you, of your mind, your designs, your artistry, your power, your unfolding purpose. All knowledge is your knowledge, all wisdom, your wisdom. Therefore, as we apply ourselves to learning, may we be mindful that all created things are your creative expression, that all stories are held within your greater story, and that all disciples of disciplines, of order and design are chasing after your thoughts, so that greater mastery of these subjects will yield even greater knowledge of the symmetry and wonder of your ways. God, grant us discernment and wisdom. Guard us from error. Grant us, your children, knowledge and understanding. Lead us to truth. God, bless the labors of this season. Shape us for your service. Amen. Beyond that liturgy being, I think, fitting for the why we are assembled here, I think it also sort of speaks to some of what we will be dealing with in this session and perhaps the next, as we sort of wrestle with the account of the flood, right? And but before we get there, because what we will see in the account of the flood, and I know I'm telling you what you've already know because you've done the reading from Holy Imagination, and I know you all have read Genesis 7, 8, and 9, which covers the account of the flood, and we are all diligent, very attentive students, so we know that there's some conflicting information in the accounts of the flood, right? We know that the story that we've been told as children and that was immortalized in Schoolhouse Rock, which helped me to learn my multiplication tables. Elementary, my dear, 2 times 2 is 4. Elementary, my dear, 2 times 3 is 6, right? And that story from that starts with 40 days and 40 nights. Didn't it rain, children? Not a speck of land in sight. Didn't it rain? But Noah built the ark so tight, they sailed on, children. And I'm going to stop there because it requires me to hit a slightly higher octave. And my mom damaged me as an early child when she said that I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. So I don't want to offend you guys anymore with my singing. But we all know this story, right? The animals, and we've seen pictures of 2 giraffes and 2 horses and 2 sheep, and filing in to the ark. But somewhere in the text, we also, as we were reading it, we learned that Noah also received the instructions to bring the animals in 7 by 7, right? And why? It's unclear to me why either of those numbers are significant. But what is we should take note, I think, is that there are different accounts, and so that gets to part of what we were dealing with in this liturgy is, all stories are God's stories, even though that they might not always make sense, and so we're struggling to just sort of discern and be clear readers. And I think we know from our previous study that the J text, right, presents. Anyone go ahead and drop it in the chat before I say it. Let's see if we can get that. What are the 2? Anyone remember the 2 key distinctions between the J or the Yahwist text? What type of God is present in the J text, so that we know that it's J versus P? Anyone? All right. So when we have an anthropomorphic God, when we see God in either human form or exhibiting human characteristics, right? That's the anthropomorphic. That's the J God. That's the God telling Adam and Eve, well, we now know it wasn't Adam and Eve. It was just Adam. Don't eat from this tree over here, right? We don't know what. Yes, thank you. Often a low opinion of humanity is expressed in the J text, right? And then in the priestly text, we see a God who is the text tends to be much more consistent with focusing on genealogy, order, the proper way to do or not to do something. And as we saw in the story of Cain and Abel, the first portion of Cain and Abel, I think verses 1 through 1 through 10, maybe 11, we have the anthropomorphic God. We have God conversing with Cain. And, you know, Cain, you need to get your, well, why was God talking to Cain? What was the issue? Right? We know that an offering was made, and that God had no regard for Cain's offering. And
Cain's reaction was not a good one.
Right. He was in his feelings, as some people might say, right? And God counsels him, you need to get that in check. You need to deal with that, because something bad might happen. And of course, we know something bad happened. And then, you know, rather than an eye for an eye, or shedding blood, the Cain's blood in exchange for the blood that was shed of Abel, God banishes him, and he has to sort of walk the land. And then we see a shift in the narrative to a sort of genealogy, right? That we find out that Adam and Eve had an additional child, Seth, and then we follow all the way down, right? So right there, again, we're seeing the text go one intact story in the J tradition, the Yahweh's tradition, and then we see it shift over to the priestly tradition. So we're going to move in when we're talking about Noah and the flood. Those things are going to be right next to each other, right? So one of the things that I will do when we're getting into that text, I will pull up on the screen so we can actually see how they are existing side by side. But you know, if you have your Bible with you, please feel free to have that along. I invite I will be sharing from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Well, actually, let me not say that. I have the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. I think that the source that I will be putting on the screen is the New Revised Standard, but it may be something different. But I actually, for the purposes of sort of understanding, and as it's said here in Holy Imagination, be mindful that all, you know, that I may be mindful that all created things are your creative expression, that all stories are held within your greater story, right? We're going to be hearing different stories about the same story, right? Or different versions of the same story. So I think it's helpful, you know, at some point, you know, somebody may be reading from the Message Bible and say, well, hey, what I'm seeing here is a little bit different, which may give a different interpretation, right? Like as we saw with the debate or the conversation last week over the word regard, right? About Cain's offering. Like in my version, it says no regard, which is kind of like, you know, oh, more socks. Great. But then the Message Bible, and I think maybe even King James makes it very, you know, uses a word that suggests that God wasn't indifferent, but actually didn't like, was upset perhaps with, you know, Cain's offering, which may give some insight into why Cain felt the way that he did. So we'll do that, but I won't dwell on chapter 5. And in fact, I just want to lift it up because I'm going to suggest, I'm going to offer a movie recommendation, right? Like, so if you talk to Jioni, you often might get a song recommendation, a movie recommendation, and, you know, a place to get a good slice of pizza or some place to eat. You know, that's something I like to do. But I will suggest that if you want to see an interesting take on not only the creation story, but also the flood story, which we will be dealing with, you might want to consider checking out the movie Noah, which came out I can find it, but it came out in this century. I think Darren Aronofsky, he's a filmmaker, did it. He has a lot of interesting work, but it stars Russell Crowe as the title character Noah. But in this, in addition to telling the story of Noah and the flood, there are some weird characters, these things like watchers, these kind of like giants that are these mythical characters that aren't in the flood story, but they appear to be in book in chapter 5, right? And I'll just read it. And says, this is the list. No, I'm sorry, excuse me. Yeah, it's chapter 5. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I lost my place. It's chapter 6, and it says, when the people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took their wives with them, of all that they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh, their days shall be 120, right? And it goes on and sort of talks about this interesting half or part human, part godly, or the sons of God, which is different than the sons and the daughters of man. So this different sort of group, and it has echoes, I would argue, and shades of Greek mythology or Roman mythology, right? Where we had the demigods, right? You had Hercules, and you had others who were the products of a union between a divine, a god, and a human, right? So we know that there were a lot of myths and stories that were taking place. And so this is one of the only kind of passages in the Bible where you have an element or a story that is sort of reminiscent of Greek and or Roman mythology, at least I should say in the Hebrew Bible. You might have some shades of that in the New Testament or the Christian Bible, but certainly in the Old Testament, this is one of the few instances of that. So I would encourage you to maybe take a look at that before you watch Noah, because that gives a little bit a more context to these creatures that are in that book. So now what I would like to do, I'm trying to all right, I'm just checking the chat here. So last week I played a brief excerpt from the movie The Green Pastures. And I don't know, did anyone get a chance to check it out? I'm looking at the chat here. What is that? Yes. So Marion Bennett is asking the question, is the suggestion that the giants and women had children? Yes. That is clearly what this reader of the text says. And it is actually, I was very intrigued when I encountered this in my in seminary and in my Hebrew Bible class. And I asked, my professor about it. And I think the way Dr. Bellis described it as it's odd. She said, yes, it's an odd and a curious story, but it has no other, there's nothing else like it. and there's really not a lot of commentary. And I actually tried to do, a little bit of, research at the time, and then again to sort of see if we could illuminate it, but it's there. Yes. So I'm going to, so we're going to move here, and let me share my screen. So the scene that we're about to see is, last week we saw God's encounter, or the Lord's encounter with Noah, and giving Noah instructions to build the ark. But we're going to set that up. We're going to go, a scene earlier in the movie where just before that, where God returns to earth for the first time after the Cain killing Abel and giving the instructions. And so God is trying to sort of determine what's going on back here on earth. And so here, all right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. So let me.
Birds are going about their business all right. And how you little flowers making out?
We okay, Lord.
Yes, you looks very pretty.
Thank you, Lord.
It's just the human beings make me so downhearted. Here's as nice a Sunday as they's turning out anywhere, and nobody making the right use of it.
Lord.
Well, now, this is more like it.
Lord.
It's nice to see people praying.
Oh, Lord, the smokehouse is empty.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord, let me get them groceries.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord, let me see that little six. Ha!
Gambling. And with frozen dice.
It's $1.50 talking to me. How much you want of it, Riney?
I'll take 4 bits of it.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Maybe I'll take a little more.
Come here, son.
Give me some of that.
Why, you just a little boy. Gambling and sinning, and you've been drinking. You ought to be ashamed. And you gamblers ought to be ashamed leading this boy to sin.
He's the best crap shooter in town, mister.
I'm going to tell his ma. I'll bet she don't know about
No, she don't know. She don't know nothing.
You find my old lady you do more than I can. She run away last night with a railroad man. She eloped.
this. Where's your daddy?
He's flat under the table. You know, he's so drunk he can't move.
Hey, see if you can beat him, preacher man. There's 2 bits open here.
I ain't going to beat you. I'm going to teach you. I may have to teach you all.
I'll take those 2 bits.
That's my money.
This here mankind I've been peopling my earth with sure ain't much. I got a good mind to wipe 'em all off and people the earth with angels. No. Angels are all right singing and playing and flying around, but there ain't much on working the crops and building the levees. No, sir. Mankind's just right for my earth if he just wasn't so doggone sinful.
All right. So, let me close this out. Thank you all. So, so what we have there, right, is what we see in the text. And actually, let me go ahead and start working it up, right? So, we see there that, all right. Let me share my screen again. But here we have, we have a sort of a Yahwist interpretation, if you will, of God, right? Descending and walking upon the earth and encountering humanity and seeing the corruption, right? And seeing that there is this experiment, if you will, has gone awry. And I think that this interpretation sort of comports with what we have often been, our sort of traditional sense of the Bible. And I want to, it's funny, Sumerian Bennett, on the whole thing about giants and humans mating, right? And like, never heard of that, but it's right there, right? Like, it's not, we're not making it up. But, again, I think it's important to sort of lift up a term that was used last week. Does anyone remember ideological? Go ahead, if you have it, put it in the chat or unmute yourself. So ideology is basically means making sense, right? So many of these stories are about the ancient people. So ideology, so this is coming from the study companion. Let me try to pardon my my workspace here. So I shared 2 books last week. This one here, the Hebrew, what's it called? The Introduction to the Hebrew Bible by John Collins. It's a textbook. If you want to go deeper, feel free, but I actually think Holy Imagination does a lot of what we want. But if you're looking for something like that, and then I have the study companion for that as well. And so it says ideology. Ideologies are stories or myths that explain the origin of culture or religion. The primeval history contains numerous ideological explanations. For example, the curses in Genesis 3 explain why snakes don't have legs, or women experience childbirth, the pain of childbirth. These are how people are trying to sort of understand the world around them. Genesis 1 ends on the day of rest, explaining the liturgical observance of the Sabbath, right? So all of these, stories, particularly in the first 11 books, or I should say 10 books, 10 to 11 books of the Bible before we get to the patriarchs, right, are examples of the ancient people trying to understand the world that they're living in, their culture, their religion, the environment, right? So it's helpful to sort of think about the giant story as well as everything that we're covering within that context. All right. So right now I'm going to share my screen again. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to look at the text. And can I have 2 readers? Can I have a J reader and a P reader? A Yahwist reader and a priestly reader. Don't all speak at once. Brother Carlos, you're muted, but I see your mouth moving. So
I'm here.
All right.
I'll be Jay.
Okay. And then all right. You're up, Sister Bennett. You got your camera on. So what we have here, hopefully this is large enough for everybody to see.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're looking at Genesis chapter 6, verses 5, right? And we're going to go, and we some of these passages are rather lengthy, so we don't have to go through them all line by line, but you get a sense of the differences in how these 2 stories are living. All right, let me not say stories, because it's
Story.
yeah, how they're living next to each other, right? and how yeah, well, I'll make that analogy a little bit later. So we're going to go ahead and start. So Brother Carlos.
Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. The Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord.
I'm
Right.
P.
I think,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is the line of Noah. Noah walked with God. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. When God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth, God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make it an ark with compartments and cover it inside and out with pith.
Okay, we can pause there, right? So one thing that would like now, before you said this is the line of Noah, and then the text, if we were reading the Bible, not this excerpt, if you will, you would have seen the shift from J to P, back to J, then over to P, right? Now, what we're seeing here is, again, well, give some impressions, right? Like Brother Carlos, I'm going to pick on you, and Sister Marion, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to ask the same question, if you will. What is the God in the text that you read, or who is the God? What is the impression? What, as a reader of the story, what type of God are we encountering?
well, mine is vengeful. He's saddened and vengeful and just disheartening.
Okay.
Well, when I was reading my part, I saw some similarities. I mean, both gods are human. They see, they walk, and we see a thought process in the priestly way.
Right. One could argue, like, if I may, right, what I heard you Carlos was describing very sort of like human emotions, right? Unambiguously. Now, what I hear you saying, Sister Marion, is that a lot of that is here as well, right? But we see more of a sort of a systematic kind of like thought process, like an orderly kind of like approach to things.
Right. He's just, in my version, God is saying, giving specific steps and instructions.
Right. And again, if we go back to what I think is, it's on page 8 of Holy Imagination, where they have the chart that sort of explains the 4 sort of sources, right? Yahwist is known for anthropomorphic depictions of gods and tends to have fairly low opinions, right? That's there. And then when the priestly is associated with religious leaders and is concerned with ritual, observance of law, dietary, ancestry, and so forth. So we see, particularly in, I mean, the P text, in this example has many of the hallmarks, right? It begins
right, it
with
about the sons that they had, which is
right.
not in the other version.
And ancestry, right? And then also, we see, if we were to keep, kind of going a little bit more, we see how God is giving very detailed instructions, right? The length of the ark, and I'm right here on verse 15. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits, right? So God didn't say, Noah, go out and build an ark that can withstand the stormy weather. He says, God says, this is what you got to do, right? And it's almost like, what can be inferred by why we need that level of specificity? Or why someone might give that level of specificity?
Well, I would think there are a couple of reasons. You might think the people you're giving it to can't figure it out on their own.
Okay.
Or, this is really a blueprint to a group of people living near water. And so, how do we instruct them to build things that they can use to fish or to travel? So it's kind of like a how-to, a manual you get from Lowe's or Home Depot.
Right. I like that example that you gave, and I had not thought about that, right? Like, an instruction to people who live near water, right? So if you live on the coast or you live down in New Orleans, right?
Pensacola, where I am.
Or where?
Pensacola, I went through Sally a year ago.
Right. So I take it down there in Pensacola, right?
Yeah, there are boats everywhere. There are marinas everywhere. You go to a restaurant and it's in a marina. And
some of the homes, right, are built up. They might have a carport under the house.
Right.
But it's not a garage that we might think of in other parts of the country, you're not gonna really invest. You're gonna make sure that it's sturdy and can withstand, but you're not gonna put drywall and your carpet down there.
No, never again will I have wall-to-wall carpet. But can I just make a comment about the flood and all? Last year when we were going through Sally, it's really easy then to make up this story about the flood, because we are still recovering down here in this area from the flood. There are things that we can't go to because they haven't been repaired. Certain docks, certain tourist attractions are still not repaired. So, this is a real story for us.
Right. And I'm not going to go there. You can Google it yourself, and maybe I'll do a little bit more research, and if you can check back in at 7:00, and I'll have some a more authoritative comment on this. But there is some archaeological evidence to suggest the presence that there had been at some point in time a great flood in the area that would be at least in the ancestral memory of the people who were putting together these stories, right? But it could be, to your point, as simple as they're living in an area that is constantly prone to flood, right? They're living in the Mississippi River Valley before levees, right? And other things. So there was prone to flooding. So all right, let's go here. Pardon the copy job here. So all right, let me go back to this. So Sister Marion, can you quickly pick up at 17 right here where my cursor is? For my part,
I am about to bring the flood, waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives, and all that lives of all flesh. You shall take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with.
Go ahead. With you.
To keep alive. Where are you?
Here.
With you. They shall be male and female, from birds of every kind, cattle of every kind, every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. For your part, take of everything that is eaten and store it away to serve as food for you and for them. Noah did so just as God commanded him, so he did.
All right, Brother Carlos, right here.
Okay. Yep. The Lord said to Noah, go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean animal, you shall take 7 pairs, males and their mates, and of every animal that is not clean, 2, a male and a mate. Of the birds of the sky also 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon all the earth. For in 7 days' time I will make it rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the earth all existence that I created. And Noah did just as the Lord commanded him.
So wait a minute, what happened? I'm confused.
Yeah.
Are you guys you guys following what's going on here? So here we not only do we have 2 very clearly different instructions. One says, 2 of each kind, a male and a female, right? And then we hear 7 pairs. So that's not actually 7, it's 14 of each clean animal, a male and and their mates, and then 2 of all animals that are unclean.
What
right?
are clean and unclean?
What are clean and unclean?
Yeah.
So and my I'm gonna freelance this one here. So don't footnote me in the paper or on the test, which will be coming at the end in 2 weeks time. But you all know that because you got the syllabus. But my I'm gonna go out on and speculate that we're beginning to see the introduction of Levitic law, right? Of like dietary laws and whatnot. So perhaps pigs, hogs, right? Or shellfish, right? Or even it could be a snake, right? It could be something that is not deemed appropriate for one reason or another for human consumption, but serves a purpose in and of its own right? I don't know, maybe there are people who eat bees, but most people aren't necessarily eating bees, but we know that bees are necessary for pollination, right? So it could be, a creature like that. That's what I would get. Thank you for that opportunity to answer that question, because I think what we're beginning to see with those 2 passages that we read, or that were read for us, some degree of an attempt to harmonize the 2 stories, right? Clearly to me, the one, in addition to the characteristics that we've talked about that define the differences between the J and the P text, right? To me, the J writer is much more of is like a fiction writer, right? Someone or a creative nonfiction, like a storyteller, right? I want to sort of engage your senses and get you sort of thinking and for you to be, sort of entertained to some extent, right? And I'm not saying that to diminish the importance of the material, but that, but that's how they're the style of writing. Whereas the P writer to me says like, no, this is important, for you to understand in order to survive. Now there's some elements of it, right? Because that where they both come together, because we have clearly hear in the J text the a distinction between clean and unclean animals, right? But we also, and that's part of what's going on. Did you have a question, Mary?
Well, kind of a comment, because I haven't gotten over the fact that there are two versions of creation. I mean, I've been reading the Bible now for decades and just never paid attention to it. So now there are two versions of the flood story. So I'm beginning to look at the Bible as an anthology. It's a collection of different myths about creation, etc., from different cultures. And they're trying to appeal to a lot of people by having both versions or more than one version. And who knows what they left out, what they rejected.
Yes. What does that mean to you, though? Talk to me.
It makes it more kind of not universal, but broader in scope. So this Bible is drawing from more traditions than I thought about. And I'm not a biblical scholar. I haven't studied ancient history much, but it's fascinating. This is a collection of old stuff from perhaps more parts of the known world at that time than I realized.
And I think it says more about people really thinking about what's going to be in this Bible, and just I thinking the book of Thomas, for example, they left out, for which we can be so grateful. So there was a lot of good thinking, even though probably some of them didn't agree with some of it.
So I what you both said resonates with me, and I'll bring some attention shortly to, or I would ask you guys to at some point take a look to the chat. But let's go back to the liturgy that we read at the beginning, right? It says, all knowledge is your knowledge, all wisdom your wisdom. Therefore, as I apply myself to learning, may I be mindful that all created things are your creative expression, that all stories are held within your greater story, right? So we have all of these all of these stories, these threads coming here, but they're all part of a greater story, which it seems to me what I'm part of what I'm hearing, and part of what I might posit is that there is a sort of a wrestling with kind of trying to understand that greater story, right? So they're trying to, put it together. They're not perfect. And one could argue that it would be, it's like, we all have worked on group projects, and let's just say in school, like at work, it might be a little bit different where you got the boss says, no, I want it done this way, right? I want it to be 300 cubits in length and 50 in this and 30 in that. So you're just, you're building it, according to spec, right? But then it's just like, go ahead and just do it, right? Like it's, I think one of the times my wife saw my mother and I, how should I say, have an argument. And my wife was like, I'm gonna marry into this crazy family. My mom and I were arguing over how to cut onions, right? I was the cook, she was my sous chef, right? And I said, I want them, I can't remember. I either wanted them finely chopped and she wanted them rough chopped, or she wanted them finely chopped and I wanted them, the other way around, right? Now it was me, but I just, I told her she'd cut the onions, right? When she starts cutting them the way that I don't want them to cut, then I have to, go back in there. And then we ended up having, this huge argument. And we might have even argued over which was the appropriate knife to use at that particular point in time. But, that's just what goes on when we, when we do these things. But, So it can be a challenge, right? When you have sort of these competing visions or even just purposes for doing something, right? Well, I want to tell a story, right? I just want to kind of tell a story that kind of gives a little bit of sense as to where we're coming from and what how we ended up in this moment. And then you might have, and that an argument could be made that is, what is motivating the J writers. And you have the priestly writers like, no, we need to make, we living in exile here in Babylon. Something went wrong. I don't want to be here again. We need to make sure that these people understand how not to stray from the path. Sister Marion?
Well, I think the fact that both versions or two versions are in this one book, it's an acknowledgement on someone's part that there's no monopoly as to how to do it or what happened, certainly in the creation story. So, they're saying we don't really think we have the ultimate answer. So here are the best two versions we like.
Right.
You pick.
Right. Did somebody else have something? Did I see a hand? All right. So real quick, I'll just read it because I don't know if we have some folks on the phone or if they had a chance, but Reverend Moya dropped in the chat from the New Interpreter Bible Commentary. Source criticism has explained this variety in terms of a shift from P to J material. A redactor retained both versions, yet the redactor may not have thought this to be a problem, right? So, that's interesting. And it could be like I'll spare you the details of another mom-son issue, if you will. But there's a story my mom and I always sort of talk about from when I was a little boy. And whenever I tell the story, she thinks it happens in one place. I know it happened where it really happened, right? But she thinks it happened at the grocery store. I know it happened at the laundromat, right? But the way I start the story is just like that, right? She may think, whether it happened here or there, it doesn't matter. This is what happened, right? And so it could be thinking about it could be thinking about what Reverend Moya dropped into the chat, right? That we've all heard, and we can think about this in our own family, right? Mom and dad all might tell the story of how they met differently, right? I know it was my wife who was checking me out across the room, which got me to notice her, right? Everybody knows that. I know that. But she says, it was the other way around, right? But the point is that we were here at Madame Tussauds at a holiday party, and we, had conversation, and 12 years later, as of this past Sunday, we've been married, right? Thank you very much. So at the end of the day, all right, we're going to give credence to both narratives to some extent, but what matters most is this story that in my case, explains the Palmer family, right? This is, how Middleton and Caldwell ultimately came into this world. And this is another example here, right? So we'll leave it at that. Any closing thoughts? I don't know. We will obviously pick up, with this, material at 7:00. You have given me much more to sort of think about and research in between trying to finish a couple of papers for tomorrow. So I it's my every intention to make the we can add more to the conversation. I certainly think that for those of you who were here, I invite you back and to share what may have resonated with you, so that we can also kind of advance the conversation and bring more into folks.
Could I tell just another quick story about personality types? You probably have heard of Myers-Briggs, and there's sensing and feeling and all that. Well, they divided us up, and I was in a feeling one, and there's another group over in sensing, and we were both in circles. But the feeling people were taking the time to get acquainted, get their names, know a little bit about them. The sensing type had set up the easel and were at it going, like gangbusters. And that is part of that whole thing too. How do you approach getting something done? Just how you like to see it done. And that's what I see in this too. Same kind of thing.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. I'm gonna just close this out with another excerpt from Liturgy for Students and Scholars for as our prayer, and then afterwards, if you have time, you can stick around for approximately 3 minutes and 20 seconds. So we'll go. Let us look to the Lord. Dear Heavenly Parent, as I apply myself to study these subjects that we might find at first tedious, reward our efforts with new insights, fresh inspiration, small epiphanies, and with the firm conviction that you are at work in our hearts in all circumstances, not only broadening our knowledge, but also shaping our hearts by patience, endurance, and discipline, that we might mature to more fittingly and humbly serve the purposes of your greatest kingdom. In the mighty name of your Son, our Savior Jesus, we humbly pray this prayer. And given that we are listening or studying the Great Flood, I figure what was more fitting to close us out than hurricane